Hello, I'm Dale Ander, and I'm a member of the Control Center Development Support Teams. Welcome to a series of videos covering the key capabilities of IBM Sterling Control Center. If you don't know, Control Center is a tool that can be used to track key actions and activities that are occurring across your B2B and file transfer infrastructure. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how to debug SLCs. SLCs, also known as service level criteria, are a key feature of Control Center Monitor. If you didn't know, Control Center actually consists of two products: Director, which facilitates full lifecycle management of your ConnectDirect servers, and Monitor, which allows you to view the status and actions and activities that are occurring not only on those ConnectDirect servers, but also on B2BI, SSP, Global Mailbox, ITXA, Connect Express, the list goes on. But SLCs, they allow you to tell Control Center about processes and file transfers that are either supposed to happen at a specific time or aren't supposed to take too long or even too little time. Because, in Control Center, you can write rules, and rules are triggered based on events that occur, but you can't have an event for something from a process that never ran. But if you have your SLCs defined to tell Control Center about when things are supposed to run or how long they're supposed to take when they do run, then what's called the SLC service will generate events when your SLCs aren't satisfied, if you will, and then you can have rules to watch for those events. SLCs, they come in handy when you have maybe a process of a EDI document coming into a mailbox and it needs to be responded to within 15-30 minutes. Well, you can create a workflow SLC that has two milestones, one for the file appearing or the data appearing in a mailbox, and another for the process that actually handles that data. And if the SLC isn't satisfied, if you have rules in place, you can have actions taken like generate an alert, send an email, what have you. Another place where SLCs are handy are for your transfers that have to occur by a certain time, either every day, weekly, monthly. And you just set up an SLC with an appropriate schedule, watching for that transfer or watching for those transfers on the servers or server that they're supposed to occur on. And if it doesn't happen, events will be generated. And if your rules are in place, you can be notified. Note that this video is going to be pretty detailed. I'm going to get into how Control Center works in some ways, at least where it's important for you to know when you're debugging SLCs. And there is an intro to SLC video that I've made that I recommend you watch, but you don't have to watch it before this. I'll try to explain some of the concepts as we go. Before I tell you how to debug your SLCs, there's some information about the system that I think would be helpful for you to know. The SLC service, as I said, generates events about things that did not occur. How does it do that? Well, the SLC service consumes your SLC definitions, and then it'll set up all these timers for things that are supposed to happen. And if the SLC service sees events about those things that you've defined, then it'll cancel those timers before they go off. But if it doesn't cancel the timers when they go off, they'll generate the events about the things that did not occur that would allow your rules to be triggered and actions to be taken. Know that the SLC service is only active in the CEP, the Controlling Event Processor. If you didn't know, you can have multiple EPs in your Control Center system. Why would you do that? Maybe you want high availability, that when you have multiple EPs, you could take one or more down and their monitor servers will be temporarily assigned to the EPs that are still running, which would result in no lag in collecting data from those monitored servers. Another reason might be you just have so many servers that you need to have multiple EPs to handle the load. But whatever, the SLC service has to get events from all your event processors, from all your monitored servers. And it can do that two ways. It can get them from what's called the event monitor service. It also only runs in the CEP like the SLC service. And its job is to read data, read those events generated by all your EPs from the database and feed them to the SLC service. Or if you have a single EP and you set the engine property called bypass event monitor for events to true, then the SLC service can get its events directly from the rule service, which is far more efficient than getting data from the database. And why would you want to do that? Well, to reduce the delays in the SLC service getting events that occurred. Because if the SLC service doesn't get the events about things that happened in time, those timers that I mentioned that get set up won't get canceled, and you'll get events about things that supposedly didn't happen, but really what happened is that they did, but the SLC service didn't know about it quick enough to prevent the did not occur events from being generated, which can trigger your rules and result in what are called false alerts. So if you can, set that bypass event monitor for events to true, but you can only do it if you have a single EP system. In this picture below, kind of shows the flow of events in the system. You know, all the events, whether they're coming from the rule service, when you've got that bypass event monitor for events property set true, or from the event monitor service, they come into the rule service. It's got all your SLC definitions, and if they're not being met, those timers go off, generates the did not occur events. They go to the DBG service, go to the metadata rule service where your metadata rules are applied, and then finally to the rule service. And if you have your rules in place to watch for those did not occur events, then actions can be taken. You could be notified or whatever. What else? SLCs are assigned a unique identifier when they run called the instance ID. That's important to know if you have what's called the concurrence count on your SLC set, to where multiples of these are running simultaneously. When you're looking at your SLC events, they'll include that instance ID, and you can hopefully keep like SLC data together. Know that milestones within workflow SLCs also have these instance IDs, and they're unique, and it'll be helpful for you to know that they're generated sequentially. So if your SLC's instance ID is 5 and it has 2 milestones, they'll probably have an instance ID of 6 and 7. That's important when you're looking through your SLC debug report and maybe you have SLC events from multiple SLCs. It'll let you know what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. SLC debug reports are real important, and when you look at them, you'll see SLC names and they don't exactly match your name, and you're going, well, how do I make light of that? Know that in the debug reports that the SLC name is going to be the first part of what you'll see in there. Then you'll see the schedule name, because you can have multiple schedules associated with a single SLC. And you can have some other values, but know that off to the right, in this case 7630, that's the instance ID, and that's the number you'll need to keep track of. Here you can see an actual SLC event. This one was actually about something that did occur. A process started, and I wanted to point out that if you wanted to know what caused this SLC event to be generated, besides your SLC being there, you can look for the value of the SLC source event ID right here. And in this SLC event, here it is. It was 7865. You could actually look up that event ID in the database, and you would see the event that triggered this SLC event. What was this SLC event? Well, the message ID is CSLC 033I, and that means that your workflow has started. And if you want to know what workflow, it's actually in the short text or the message text, and it's right here, SLC. Here's my name, process new data within 5 minutes. The schedule, remember you can have, or maybe you don't know, you can have multiple schedules with one SLC definition. In this case, it was 5 minutes max. And at the end, as I had mentioned before, there's my SLC instance ID. The other thing I thought I'd mention is the activity type. You'll see that for SLC events associated with workflow SLCs. In this case, it's a workflow SLC event, as opposed to, you might see MS for milestone SLC events, which I typically tell you to suppress those. When you're debugging your SLCs, you should already know that there's different kinds of SLCs: the workflow, the simple SLC, the wildcard, and standard. But these can be further categorized as either step or process SLCs. And when I say SLCs, I mean that a little bit loose, because when you're talking about workflow SLCs, they have milestones, and they can be step or process. Know that step milestones or SLCs are triggered by process step events, event types 1 and 2. Whereas process SLCs are triggered by process events, which are event types 3 and 4, the start and end events. And the reason you care about that is when you're debugging your SLCs, if you know you're dealing with a step SLC, you can only pay attention to the step kind of events, event types 1 and 2. Whereas the process SLCs or process milestones, you'll only pay attention to the process start and process end events. And the fewer events you have to pay attention to in your debug report, the faster, the more efficient you'll be at coming to conclusions as to what went wrong. What makes an SLC or a milestone be process or step-based? It depends on the criteria you've specified. It's kind of an implicit definition. So if any of your criteria includes any of these things that I've shown, like the destination file or the source file or the step name, then by definition it's step-based. And if it's not step-based, then it's process-based. Concurrence count is another attribute for your SLCs that may or may not cause problems. Know that concurrence count for SLCs are handled differently depending on the schedule associated with your SLCs. When you have a calendar schedule, the concurrence count tells the SLC service how many instances of whatever you have in your match criteria are supposed to run during the time frame specified. So you don't want to have your concurrence count set too high, because if it's higher than it should be, you'll get events about things that didn't run that you didn't expect to run. SLCs with duration schedules, on the other hand, the concurrence count tells the system how many instances might be able to run concurrently at the same time. And if you have the concurrence count set lower than it should be, then instances of whatever your match criteria are looking for may not be monitored. If you have your concurrence count set to 1 and 5 of them are running simultaneously, Control Center is not going to look at 4 out of the 5. So be sure concurrence count is set appropriately for the kind of schedules associated with your SLCs. Know that when you're looking at your SLC debug report, that each non-SLC event will have both a process time as well as the event time when it occurred on the monitored server. And delays between when the event actually occurred and when Control Center got it and processed it may cause problems, may generate what customers call false alerts. On multi-EP systems, you have to use that event monitor to get events from the database to feed to the SLC service, as I talked about on an earlier slide, and that's even another delay that can cause more problems. When you're looking at your SLC debug report, we'll have this information on top of the events that the report contains. And this first one, the event time, that's when the event occurred on your monitored system, monitor server. The process time is when did the rule service inside Control Center finish processing that event. And this last one is an estimated time, and in fact it's not even estimated here, but this is after the event monitor has finished processing the event. When was it fed to the SLC service? And know that when you see these are just an estimate. In this case, I can kind of see, for example, the event time was at 16:28:17, 377 milliseconds, and the rule service finished with it, less than a second later. In this case, the delay in processing is clearly not going to be an issue, but this is something to watch for when you're debugging your SLCs. All right, so now I think we're going to actually show you how to do some debugging. So when you're doing your debugging, you need to know, well, what's the problem? Is it what's called false alerts? False alerts can be caused by multiple things. Incorrect SLC match criteria. That's the typical problem. SLC conflicts, like rules, at least workflow SLCs and wildcard SLCs have priorities, and if you have criteria that are common among your SLCs, they can both match the same event, so you need to set the priority appropriately for your SLCs. Another problem that occurs from time to time in systems that aren't performing well, or SLCs will generate did not occur events simply because it didn't get to process the events in time. And that could be because the timing, the schedules associated with your SLC are just so tight that Control Center can't get the events fast enough to know that your criteria were actually met. So anytime you get false alerts, start off by getting your SLC debug report. To debug your SLCs, you'll need to create an SLC debug report, and a good one. And what do I mean by a good SLC debug report? You'll have to give it the name of your SLC when you create your report. You'll want to specify all the process information that defines the processes that were supposed to satisfy your SLC. And when you give the process information, you need to give the server name, the name of the process, and the ID of the process. And be sure to give all the processes. If you have multiple milestones, you're going to want to give multiple processes. And the last helpful thing to do when you're generating your SLC debug report is to specify a good time range. You don't want to specify too small of a time range, but you don't want one that's too large either. The time range should just run from when that SLC was active to when it was inactive, and make sure you include the range for the processes that were supposed to have satisfied that SLC. And by doing that, you'll keep the amount of data included in that debug report to the bare minimum, which will be helpful, trust me. When you have your SLC debug report, you're going to want to scrutinize all the parts of it, especially the SLC definition itself, the correlator source. That's something that helps the system with workflow SLCs know what's the same between multiple milestones. What might be the same? Maybe on one milestone it's the destination file name, and on the other milestone it's the source file name. I don't know. It's in your SLC definition. Note the schedule names for your SLC. Note the monitor window start and end tolerance values. Note the concurrence count. And definitely note down the match criteria. And when you're debugging a workflow SLC, notice how many milestones there are, and make notes on the match criteria for each of those milestones. And you can have a correlator source at the high level for your whole workflow, but you can also have it down at the milestone level instead. An example of that would be for one milestone, it could be the destination file name, but the other milestone, it's the source file name. And when you're scrutinizing the process event data in that debug report, you're going to have to play computer and go, why didn't this event match my specified criteria? And that's where it comes in. You want the least number of events to look at, and if you know it's a process kind of event, a process kind of SLC, then you can just watch for the process events, and if it's a step-based SLC, you can watch for the step events and ignore the rest. So when you're looking at your SLC debug report, make sure it has two event sections. It'll always have one, and that's on the SLC events that were generated, and it should have that section where it's the events about the processes that we're supposed to satisfy. If you don't have both sections, it's because you didn't specify the process data correctly for your SLC debug report. Remember, I mentioned the SLC identifier, the instance ID. You might find when you're debugging an SLC that multiple instances of that SLC generated events during the time frame that your SLC debug report captured. And to make sense of the data that you have, to know what to pay attention to and what not to, you're going to want to check and make sure that you're staying consistent with that SLC instance ID. And there is something you can look at in the report. You can search for this string SLC instance ID and look for how many unique values you have. Remember, you're going to have some extra ones for your milestones, but you may have multiple at the workflow level, and you're only going to want to hone in on one of them. So now let's look at a real report and see if we can figure out why a false alert was generated. So this is what you'll see at the top of the report. It's got the date time when the report was run. It's got the name of the SLC that you gave when you ran the report, as well as the start and end range and the process information that you gave to the report. In this case, I'm going to be debugging a workflow SLC, and there were two processes that were supposed to satisfy it, one called send file and one called handle it. The next section in your SLC debug report is actually going to show you the definition of the SLC itself. You'll be able to know after time what kind of SLC you're dealing with just by looking at this opening XML element. In this case, it's a workflow SLC group. If that said wildcard SLC, you're dealing with a wildcard SLC. And if it just says SLC, then you're dealing with a standard SLC. Here's my name, shows it is enabled, needs to be enabled to work. Here's all the schedules associated with it. Just have one, the 5 minutes max. I have no DVGs. I definitely needed to have missing events set to true, or the missing events, the did not occur events would not be generated, so watch for that. I suppressed milestone messages, which I advise everyone do. I have the monitor start and end tolerances set to 0, which if you can do that, you should. I have the concurrence count set to 9, and this part doesn't matter because I'm suppressing milestone messages, so that setting doesn't even matter. The next part shows all my milestones in this case. If this was not a workflow SLC, we would just see the match criteria that you specified. But here I'm going to have a group of milestones, 2 in this case. The first one's milestones names arriving file. Correlator source is set to dest file. You should make a note of that. And then it's looking for a node ID. That's the monitored server name. And it says the property value is asterisk, which means it can match any server, the events from any server, which will be a hint that you don't care about the node ID and elements when you're looking for what matches, because it doesn't matter as long as it has one. Next thing it's going to look for is the process name element events, and it has to be send file. And then it's going to look for dest file, and as long as dest file starts with C:\temp/, then it will match this. And that's because that's the last thing I have in here. And know that by definition, this is going to be a step-based SLC. Why? Because the match criteria includes dest file. That was one of the element names from that list. It has a duration schedule of 0 to 5 minutes. This is fairly unimportant when you're debugging, for sure, because we're suppressing the milestone events, and this will be immaterial. Here's the next milestone. Its name is process file. Make a note of this. The correlator source for this milestone is source file. The milestone correlator for the first one was dest file. So what this means is the thing that ties these two milestones together is the destination file for one. It's kind of the file arriving. It's the triggering process for this workflow SLC. And the correlation is for the second milestone that same file has to be the source file for this milestone. So destination file, that needs to match the source file for this one. And node ID again is asterisk, so it's immaterial, doesn't matter. Process name is handle it this time. And the source file, while it has to match because of the correlator, you still have to specify it to make this be a step-based milestone. And we put C:\temp/* again. And again, the duration schedule for it, 0 to 5 minutes, doesn't really matter. Then the report, that was the end of that SLC. It had 2 milestones. Then the report shows all the schedules associated with that SLC. In this case, there was just one, and it shows that it's 5 minutes max is its name, and dmin is set to 0, and dmax is set to 5 minutes. After the schedule section in the SLC debug report comes the first of hopefully 2 event sections, the first being the SLC event section, and the last being just the event section. and that comes when you've specified the process information for the debug report. So here we have the first event. It's event ID. The event is actually right here. It looks like XML. All of the events in Control Center look like XML documents. And we pull some of the key values up at the top of each event that's listed. So in this case, the event ID comes from here, and the event time comes from somewhere else, right here at the date time. One of the key things to watch is what's the delta between the event time and the process time. And here we can see it's negligible. So delays in processing events are most likely not going to be the problem here. So this is, as I said, the SLC event section of the report. So we're seeing an SLC event, and what was it? It's CSLC 033, which means the workflow started. And here's the name of the SLC. And remember, in the debug report, the name is the full name. So it's got the name of my SLC, the schedule associated with this instance of that SLC, and right here is the SLC instance ID, which is repeated right here. And what else? We see that this SLC event actually triggered a rule, and that's the name of the rule that was triggered. And the following section will see the rule definition, so we can see what action, if any, was taken. Other key things are, you can see that the destination file was ctemp copy.file. That's the des file, and if you remember, that was the correlator for this milestone. The correlator for the other milestone, its value needs to be this, or it's not going to be a match. The server it came from, which I said was unimportant due to the match criteria, was standard 2K47. Here's that process number, here's the process name, and it was a local step start, or a remote step start, excuse me. After the triggering event, we'll actually see the SLC event from it. We can see that, okay, it was at the workflow level. Here's that message. Here's that SLC instance ID, and here's that SLC source event ID 24744, and that was the event ID that we saw of the triggering event. So now we have an SLC suppressed. You can ignore this. It's a milestone started. This was the triggering event, and it's actually the same triggering event that started the workflow. It's that remote step start that did a copy that had a destination file name that matched our SLC's match criteria. And here's the SLC event that we don't care about. The quicker you can get through the things you don't care about, the faster you'll be able to debug your SLC. Here's the third SLC event. Its triggering event was the milestone did not end by demin, and we don't care about the milestone event, so we're just going to skip over it. But you can see it was a copy termination record, and remember the min on this SLC was 0000000, so we're always going to take longer than that, but it doesn't matter. We don't care about this event. And here's the SLC event that was a result of that. Then we see another event. It's a suppressed one, so it must be a milestone one. So let's just skip over it. But it is that the milestone ended when expected, so it's that triggering event, and it's going to be that same one we saw a moment ago. It's the copy term. And this is the actual SLC event. Remember, I might have pointed out that activity type was WF and I said MS. Well, for milestones, it's actually just an M. Now, here's one we don't care about because I don't have a rule that watched for CSLC 049E. Don't care if it didn't end by dmin because I set dmin to be 0. So I'm going to skip over this. Now, workflow did not end by dmax. Okay, so you'll want to make sure that that instance ID is the one that goes with the workflow start, so you have them correlated. But bottom line, our workflow did not end by dmax, but I know it should have. I ran that second process and I saw the events for it, and they occurred within 5 minutes of the file arriving. So why didn't it work? Well, now I've got to look at the events part of the event sections, the second section. So this is just a workflow did not complete before the end of the monitoring window. Know that even though I set my monitor tolerance value to 0, the monitor window minimum value is a minute. So this is a minute after the end of the 5 minutes that was specified. Debug 8, a milestone message suppressed. So after the report criteria and after the SLC definition and after the schedule and the SLC events and the control center events that triggered those SLC events, we have another section in the report for the rules. And these will just be the rules that were triggered by the events or the SLC events in the report. So in this case, there's going to be 2 rules to see. This first one is called SLC process new data within 5 minutes -2. All of these definitions are in XML documents, and you have to look through that to understand what you're seeing, but the ID is going to have the name of the rule. There is no description. The action associated with this rule is the no operation action, one of the built-in actions that does nothing. You can see that the rule is enabled. It's not a built-in rule. You can see its priority. You might want to remember 998. Here is the match criteria for this rule, and you have to look through some of this noise. This is an entity character. I think it's a single quote. But again, when it says group ID, it's actually referencing the name of the SLC. And I guess I can say that it's a group because, an SLC can have multiple schedules associated with it and concurrence count, so they're kind of internally called groups, SLC groups. But again, here's the name. It's got match criteria that says look for an event type 6. What's an event type 6? That means SLC event. Remember, 1 and 2 are process step start and step end. 3 and 4 are process start and process end. 6 is an SLC event. Know that 66 is a suppressed SLC event. Again, here's the match string that's actually used. It's looking for my SLC name, and it has to be an event type 6. So this is going to be the rule that catches all the events we don't care from this SLC, and they'll do the no operation. I said there's going to be a second one, and this is going to be a higher priority rule. See, it's 995, not 996. And so this is the rule that's going to catch the events for this SLC that we actually care about. Again, in the match criteria, it's got look for that SLC name. It's right here, process new data within 5 minutes. And this is our first rule, if you will. It's got the name with a -1. And in this case, we're looking for more than just the name of the SLC. We're also looking for the CSLC 043E message, which means it didn't finish by Dmax. Again, we're looking for event type 6, so we're only looking for CSLC 043Es for the SLC type events, as opposed to maybe the suppressed SLC type events. And that's about all there is to see on this one. So after the rules section in the report comes two more sections, actions and the email server settings, or the SMTP hostname. In this case, we'll only see the actions that were associated with the rules, and you can see that one of them had an alert 1. It was the first rule, and its name is alert 1, and it's going to generate a sev1 type of alert. The no operation, these are both the built-in actions. The no operation just does nothing. And sometimes the problem is you just did not get emails, so you want to make sure that the SMTP server and host port are set appropriately. So now we're to the second event section, and here's where we're going to have to figure out why wasn't our second milestone satisfied. So from the events we saw from the SLC service, we know that send file was fine. It occurred, and we saw that the workflow started as a result of the event ID that you saw up there at the top in a previous slide on that process step started, that 24744. So if you remember, that was the event ID that triggered our workflow that we saw in the first part of the report. This is the third event associated with the send file process that we know triggered and satisfied the first milestone of our SLC. And if you looked at that suppressed milestone message, you would have seen that it referenced this copy termination record, event ID 24745. But it's not really important that we look at this, because we know that the first milestone, which consumed the send file associated. This is the fourth and last event for that send file process. Remember, I said you need to know whether you're dealing with a step SLC or a step milestone versus a process milestone or a process SLC, so you can know which events to ignore. This is a process end. We're dealing with a step milestone. This can be ignored. So now we're to the events associated with handle it. And this is where we need to hone in on why wasn't the criteria for our milestone, our second milestone, the one named handle it, matched. So we're dealing with a step milestone, so we can ignore the process start. Here's the step event for process handle it. Our job is to figure out why didn't this event satisfy the milestone criteria for the second milestone. It sure should have. We know that the correlator, which is the source file for this milestone, its value, C:\temp/copy file, matches the value of the correlator for the first milestone, which was the dest file. So why didn't this work? Let's show the properties for our second milestone and compare it to the data in this event. Node ID is asterisk, so we don't need to look at that over here. I mean, I can see it's standard 2K47, but it doesn't matter. And we already know that the process name matches, and we know that the correlator value matched. So the only thing left is source file. And here, source file is C:\temp, T-E-M-P. Here's the problem. There's a typo in this property value. That should have been C:\temp. But since it's just TMP and computers do what we tell them to, not what we meant, that's why this did not match. And that's why the SLC service said that this SLC exceeded the Dmax because it didn't find events that matched the criteria that we specified. So that's it for going through the SLC debug report. I hope that was helpful. It was a little contrived. I actually made that match criteria be wrong on purpose, but I've seen similar problems where there's just a typo in there and no one noticed. We're human. Here's some, if you want more information on SLCs, besides that intro video that I referenced. There's some documentation on an overview of SLCs, a lot more details than I've gone into this video in the troubleshooting SLCs. The following two bullets tell you the events to look for when you have a duration or a calendar or both schedule associated with your SLCs. And here's some white papers that I'd previously written on how to effectively set up SLCs. If you follow these recipes, you'll almost always have SLCs that work the first time. And there's a second white paper that I've shown how you can not only know when things occur, but know when things occurred successfully or not.